Good evening, Vandy. It's just so lovely to talk with you.
Hi, Mel. This is like
And
old friends having a chat, isn't it?
yeah, no, from one experienced chair to somebody with big L plates on, I think.
You're doing great.
Oh, no, well, I mean, the first thing I want to say is, well done and congratulations to both you and Laurie for the most amazing online exhibition. And I know you've worked really, really hard on it. And loads of people have, contacted me and others to say how much they appreciate being able to exhibit in this current situation. And also the quality of the exhibition is fabulous. So, before we start talking about your award-winning painting, a big thank you from me, and I'm sure from all of the members and friends of the society.
Thank you, Mel. But I have to say, credit there has to go to Laurie because she's just done an incredible job on the way it looks. She's been amazing. And I want to say hello to Steffi because I can see she's watching. Hi, Steffi. Hi, Dawn. Really nice to see people watching. That's great. It's brilliant.
Are you going to go through all your contacts or?
No, I just saw two names and I thought I wanted to say hello because it's really lovely to have people watching. It's great.
I'll give you an appropriate gap because I know you've got many, many, many art friends, which is lovely.
Best thing about being an artist.
Oh, anyway, many congratulations on your award. I know, having talked to you, these awards are always a surprise and a privilege. And you've won the Tindalls Award for your painting Coastal Path.
Yep.
And I wonder whether we could just start off with you putting the painting up, of course, but also just talking about it and what Coastal Path and what attracted you to painting it in the first place.
Here it is. It was a real first for me, actually. It sort of was born out of us being at Wells for so long in February. As was one of my other paintings in the exhibition, the one about the storm, because I don't know whether you remember, there was that incredible storm where literally the house was shaking and they almost had to close I think they did close ask people not to come into the gallery for at least half a day because the storm was amazing. And there's actually still a little bit of a stormy element in this one. But this was interesting because we did some in the few days that we weren't stewarding in the gallery. Mark and I actually did some walks on the coastal path because North Norfolk has got this amazing path that sort of meanders along the coast, and it's really lovely. On a good day, it's muddy, which is probably the reference to a lot of that sepia color in the painting. But it's glorious because you get these beautiful views across the marshes, and I was sort of drawn to trying to paint all the elements of Norfolk in this painting. So there was, the really bright blue sky, the orangey colors that you get in the mud and in the boats within Wells. You get these beautiful, clear, bright oranges. The spray of the water, of the sea, the blues of the sea. So it was really something of a little bit of a color study. And although the shapes in there aren't directly related to things like boats and that sort of thing, for me there was this meandering along the coastal path that I wanted to convey. It was just that feeling of being out there with this beautiful sky and all the fascinating lines in the channels in the marshes and these the muddy bits, which sound terrible but actually can be incredibly beautiful.
I mean, I was very lucky. Well, the exhibition allows you to look really closely at a painting, doesn't it? And to prepare for this chat with you, I looked really closely, more closely than I'd looked before at it. And it seems to me to be beautiful, transparent layers upon layers upon layers, but also with some really interesting texture.
Yeah.
And I wondered, and I know a lot of our artists are quite interested in texture, and you yourself have done workshops on how to create texture. I wonder if you could just explain how you did some of those textures, because they look as though they've not all been done in the same way.
No, they haven't actually. That's one of the things that's quite interesting is that actually there is this was actually a sort of, it's a mixed media, all of which they're all water-based mediums, but there's also, I was a bit unsure about whether this was going to be classified as collage or not collage, because there's this question about when or how to use collage. And interestingly, I had a conversation with Mita Hickton recently, one of our members who uses quite a lot of collage in her paintings. And I saw some of her work, which is fantastic. And the way she does it is actually coincidentally the same way as I've done this, or a similar way to what I've done here. She actually takes some of her old sketches and old paintings and she paints on watercolor paper, then she tears them up and puts them into a new painting. In this case, what I did is there are two sections in here where I have put a different texture paper down. You can see on the top left, there's a different texture paper and then a little bit of that paper on the bottom left corner. And in both of those cases, I then painted on top of it. So it is still a watercolor on paper, but basically I've used a different paper on top of my watercolor paper. So when I do my experimental watercolor course workshop, what I look at is three different elements. So one element is how you change the paper, how you've changed the support. And so a lot of the texturing here is based on that, because there's gesso. There's gesso on the background, and in some places it's quite thick. So if you look at the bottom, just sort of towards the right, you'll see there's some orange bits peeking through the blues. And that's, if you look on the quick view, using the quick view function on the exhibition, you'll be able to have a look at that and see how many colors are in there. And that's because I've actually got gesso quite thickly applied underneath this. So this painting took a long time because there were many layers. There were layers that then got pulled off, layers that, and there are some bits, and I keep wanting to point at the painting, which would be utterly useless to you guys. So I'm going to try and describe the bits I mean. If you look towards the bottom right, you'll see some little upright lines in the blue section, which were strips of watercolor paper that I stuck on, painted around, and then pulled off again. And I wanted, those were really about, as you walk along the quay at Wells, you see these concrete pillars that they use. I don't know what the name of them are, that they use to tie up boats. There's a proper name, but I can't think of it right now. So there were some of those in there, which I again used by sticking down the watercolor paper, painting on top of the gessoed paper, and then pulling them off again. I got that mark and that texture, and then I could paint over it again. So there were aspects or sections of this paper that are painting that have probably been painted over 2 or 3 times with either watercolor or with ink or on top of gesso, in order to get the effects that I wanted. So changing the support is one aspect of it. Then the other aspect I tend to look at is how you use different, changing what you put onto the paper, changing the medium. So in that instance, this was really more about using ink and watercolor. So I used acrylic ink and watercolor in different ways in different parts of it. So some of it has been put on very thickly where you see the dark lines, and some of it is quite washy where you see that sepia color of the mud flats as it sort of washes behind those dark lines. It's the same ink, it's just applied differently. In one case it's watered down, in the other case it's pure.
I mean, I think how you describe it, you almost describe the bits and pieces that went on in different parts of the painting, and yet you know, you've managed to bring it together, and it's sort of got, you know, it's got a wholeness about it, and it doesn't seem to be comprised of little bits and bobs. It just seems to be a painting, and I really love the way that you've done those marks of dark black, or I don't know whether it is black or navy blue, but really dark lines. And I think, you know, that's really brought the whole painting together. And
yeah, and
you know, I think it's really worked, those lines. And really, you must have had to have been very brave, because presumably you did those right at the end.
Yes, I did. And actually they are actually I think of those as sort of punctuation of the painting. They were the sort of last marks, and they really are the coastal path being. So there's elements of sort of looking at the environment. So the sky, the water, you know, the colors, the mud flats, the marshes, And then that last step was really looking at the meandering pathway along the North Norfolk coast. And so that dark, it's actually a dark, very dark brown, but that very dark sepia brown is actually the pathway, and as it meanders, and the sort of reference to the fact that you can get to the same place in two different, in more than one different route. And that some of these lines, these pathways link up, and they, so you can do a circular walk, you can walk along the path, along the coast, and there's so many different variations of the routes that you can take whilst you enjoy this environment. So the dark lines, and I must admit, when you go really dark, and a lot of these, they weren't painted with a brush, they were basically put on directly with the dropper of the ink bottle, and they were just literally, and I think some of it was then I then used a stick for other bits, which is the other thing I look at, is using different implements to make marks is something that I look for quite often in my paintings. Is I think they create more interesting marks than just purely using a brush. I mean, it's all a personal preference, but for me, I love looking at interesting marks within paintings. And so there was also, so this painting has had all sorts.
Yeah, as I said, there is an all-roundedness about it, and it looks very easy on the eye. I mean, I know you could get sort of diverted to the right and the left and so on through the darker lines. Also, you mentioned earlier your palette, and you've got some beautiful warm colors there, the oranges, the rusts, the reds, but also some blue and some sort of cooler colors, and they work very well together, don't they?
I always think this is a real sort of interesting combination. This palette, it's one I really rather like in slightly different forms, because you're right, it's got the cool and the warm tones, so you can get a nice balance. But for me, this was really also so much about Norfolk. It was really, I stood in front of my paper and I just thought, okay, let me think about this place that we've just been to, and I've spent so much time there. I want to try and encapsulate what I feel and what I experienced there. So the blues, and it was entirely experimental. I to be perfectly honest, I didn't know. This was one of those paintings which is which I always think of as a dialogue. You put something on the paper and then you respond to it, and as the painting develops, there are all these surprises that come along, and it's how you respond to those surprises that actually end up making the painting. So it wasn't a quick process. There were long periods where I sat thinking about what to do next, and periods when I actually thought, no, I'm going to take this off the board and throw it in the bin because it's not working. And then, I would go back and have another idea and try something different, and maybe try a little bit of sticking the paper on, the collage papers, and eventually got to the point where I thought, actually, this is looking really interesting. And I can finish this off, and I could see what to do to finish it. And actually, there was a bit of cropping because this was actually on a much bigger piece of paper, but it wasn't, because it was so experimental, I wasn't sure where it was going to go. And in the end, this was the section that I felt was what I wanted it to say.
I mean, everything you've described to any artist listening would make them think that actually you are quite brave when you paint. I mean, you don't mind experimenting. I know you yourself are very interested in different sorts of paper. You've got a whole variety of different sorts of paints. You're not scared of using different water-based paints, and in fact I know you've done oils as well. So how do you think that your sort of preparedness to go off piste, so to speak, really helps with your art and encourages you to be more original and quite unique, I think, in the way that you paint?
Mel, actually, I think it defines me as an artist. I'm so in awe of people like you, and so many other artists in our society who plan their work, and who, do all the groundwork and the thinking ahead of time. I do very little thinking ahead of time, I have to confess. I do have an idea of what I want to create when I start out. I do probably have a palette, but then occasionally I'll go completely off piste there and throw another color in and either go, oh, that's great, or oops, that was a bad idea. For me, one of the reasons I love painting, I love exploring, is the fact that I'm always learning new things, and that for me is the most exciting thing about being an artist and about painting and about trying all these different mediums. I know that in the past I've sometimes got a bit frustrated because you know that you should be developing. I've seen so many conversations about developing a style, and my style is developing or has developed over the years, but it absolutely isn't where it's ultimately going to end up, because it's going to continue to change. I hope it continues to change, because as it changes, as I experiment with new things, as I try new mediums, I learn. When I work in a different medium, I learn things that I bring to my watercolors. When I work in watercolor, I learn things that I bring to other mediums. And I just think one of the most exciting things about being an artist is the fact that you can spend the rest of your life learning new things and experimenting and making new discoveries. And of course, there's always the aspect of technology and the fact that we keep getting wonderful new materials being made, some of which are just variations on the theme, but others are really quite exciting because they do different things. And clearly, the art material suppliers are trying to build their product range to be wider and to sell more to their market. But that provides us with all sorts of interesting opportunities to experiment and to play. And that, I think, is the biggest fun. And yes, it does. There are times when I sort of stand there and think the hardest part actually is when you get to a section of a painting that you really like, and you know that it's not quite finished, and you need to do the next step, and that that's the only time I kind of hesitate and go, okay, the next step is really important, because that could either make this painting or completely screw up this bit that I really love. And so that's the only moment that I think of as being, right, you got to be brave here. You really have to sort of take that leap and think, okay, it's only a piece of paper. What's the worst that could happen? Is I throw this piece of paper in the bin. It would be disappointing because I really love this section of this painting, or I love the way this is at the moment. But you know what? It's not a crisis. I would just start over if that's what happens. And it's a bit like that thing where you sort of say, well, if I'm too afraid to experiment, I never get the joy of the discovery. So I think you have to have a little bit of both. I think I could benefit from a bit more of your style of planning, to be perfectly honest.
But then move quickly on.
But we all have our strengths and our areas that we could develop on. Otherwise, life would be very boring. So, this is something I will continue to strive towards. And I think that my experimenting is the bit of my art that I really find joyful.
I mean, this painting is one of 4 paintings that you've got in the exhibition, and all of them are very much based on the outdoors and observation outdoors. And clearly you are really inspired by nature in all its forms. And I wonder if you would just say a few words about how important, I know, from knowing that you love going for walks, you love being in the countryside. How important is that to your art?
It probably is the reason why I paint. It's the reason I started painting. I wanted to capture a feeling of space, feeling of big spaces. I have a husband who takes fantastic photographs, and every time we go wherever, doesn't matter where we are, if he's got his camera, he just takes the most beautiful photographs. And some of them are enormous, you sort of have a wonderful emotional element to it, but they didn't quite express for me what I wanted to express about those spaces. And I knew that I wasn't going to be able to do it in photography, because it's not something that there's a technical element of photography which he understands, which it's not something that appeals to me. And I have had the inspiration of a number of other people in my world, not least of whom Laurie, who I've watched over the years paint and create things create images on paper that I think are just magical. And I thought I'd really like to see how that feels, and see if I can actually evoke this feeling I have about big spaces and that sense that you get when you're sort of standing in front of this magnificent view, where it almost feels like you can take a deep breath and the world is in front of you, and it's magical. And the more I did that was sort of where I started, but then really wanting to do more and more exploring elements of nature and how I feel about it. And the more I've done it, the more I've actually realized just how important it is that we value our environment, because there are so many aspects of it that we could lose. I mean, we all know the climate change conversation. We all know how important that is. And so for me, getting out there and basically being in nature and expressing it on paper, it just feels like something that I really want to do. And I love being out there. I do love those walks. Some of my other paintings, basically my paintings are wells in this exhibition, North Norfolk, as in mainly Wales, and walking in the hills of Wales, which is where my son lives, and where I love the landscape because of it's beautiful sort of ups and downs. And when you're up on top of a hill, even though it's been quite a trog to get there, you just get to see these amazing vistas across the countryside, and I love those. So two places that I love, but they're not the only ones. In past exhibitions I've had paintings of South Africa and Australia, and in every case, the reason I go, South Africa is where I was born and where I spent the first part of my life, and when I get out there into the countryside, that's the aspect of the country that I love the most. I still have the things that when you talk to me about being in the countryside, it's the smells, it's the big spaces, it's that sense of fresh air, that sense of space, that sense of being in a much bigger place and being a very small part of a much bigger whole that are so important to me.
I mean, I think that's a lovely way to end this interview, though, or this discussion, because how you've summarized it in the last couple of minutes is just incredible. And you're making the hairs on the back of my neck stand up, actually, because I think I'm a newish artist, but one of the things that I've always felt about your work is that, and your outdoor work particularly, is you've got such a lovely idea of shapes. If you look at your winning painting, triangles, oblongs, parallelograms, they're all there, and I really admire that aspect of your work. I mean, I've basically finished everything that I wanted to ask you, and I just is there anything that I haven't asked you that you'd really like to put across? I know that you're striving to develop, now you're not chairman anymore, your own artwork, your own art enterprises, and you've had a variety of different artists working with you, and you book the village hall and they come and other SEAW artists turn up. Is there anything that you want to add that I haven't sort of gleaned from you so far?
Well, there was a question from Laurie that I think I should answer. She asked me about she asked about a crayon mark, and she asked me what I use to make the crayon mark. I use either Neocolor, which are sort of like wax, or Woodies. Actually, Woodies are a Stabilo wooden children's crayon, effectively, but they're water soluble. So you can make really interesting, quite thick marks, and then when you put the water over them, they start to dissolve a little bit. So you can either leave it dry, or you can actually put water on it. And unlike, you can get water-soluble pencil crayons, watercolor pencils. But I think what's different about the Neocolors and the Woodies is that they have a much more vibrant color. So both of those are worth exploring if you haven't played around with them. So I suppose that's one thing, is to answer Laurie's question. Hopefully that was helpful.
Always helps.
Always helps. And the other thing I think is to say that one of the aspects that I think people debate about quite often is whether it's important to paint outdoors. And I would say it's important to paint outdoors in a sketchbook if you can, to capture some ideas. But none of my ultimate paintings are done plein air. I work plein air to capture the ideas and to capture some of the colors and some of the shapes and to get my thoughts on paper, but then to really explore the emotional content of the painting and to really get down the textures and the things that I want to put on it, I have to do that in the studio. So I think there's no right or wrong answer to whether you should paint plein air, but if you can get out there with a sketchbook, I would absolutely recommend it. And probably that's the only piece of advice I would give people when it comes to painting outdoors is try and do sketches outdoors whenever you can.
And I know that you've got a wonderful studio, and it's a shame that we can't have viewers just doing a 360 degrees of your studio, because it really is so encouraging for you to work there, isn't it?
It's fantastic. I love it. I'm very, very lucky to have the space where I can just leave things around and come back in and pick things up again and carry on working on them. So yes, I am lucky. Very fortunate.
It obviously impacts hugely on your painting. Vandy, very many congratulations on the award. And just finally, what are you going to spend your vouchers on?
Oh, I've already spent it. And I can show you. I can show you. I brought 3 of my favorite colors of paint. Well, actually 2 of my favorite colors of paint and a brand new one. So I bought my orange and blue, actually, which seem really appropriate for this painting. So I've got a phthalo turquoise and a transparent pearl orange, which if you've never used it is an awesome color. It's very strong, but it's magical. I've done some playing around with them here, doing some color swatches. And this one, which is a really interesting one, I have seen it being used in a video. It's called Hematite Burnt Scarlet Genuine. It's a Daniel Smith watercolor, and it's fascinating because it's got all sorts of different colors and textures in it. It granulates and it breaks to different colors, and it's rather gorgeous. It's a warm color, so definitely one to experiment with. Have a look at it online. It's great. So I'm very happy to have already spent my award voucher.
Yeah. And I think
and a bit more.
Both of us really would, want to thank Tindalls very, very, very much for supporting this exhibition. Tomorrow evening, I'm going to record an interview with Leslie, who won the Leslie Rumble, who won the Tindalls Rose Bowl Award. And for her painting Perched on the Edge, and I'm really looking forward to that. But Vandy, thank you so much for your enthusiasm and everything you've done for the SEAW Society. You are a hard act to follow, but I'm trying my best.
You're doing brilliantly, and it's been it is always lovely to do things with the SEAW gang, because I have made really good friends amongst the other artists in the SEAW. So it's been a very valuable experience to me, and I hope our other members feel the same way. So
thank you very much, Vandy. Bye-bye.
Great. Thanks, Mel. Bye.